to medical nutrition therapy, the two very important steps that dietitians follow is nutrition screening and nutrition care process. Well, nutrition care process, you all know, has nutrition assessment, nutrition diagnosis, nutrition intervention, and then finally nutrition evaluation. Well, nutrition screening identifies patients at risk for malnutrition, and it's an ideal guide for management of every step, the nutrition assessment. But I would here like to make a point. Doing nutrition screening achievable in a setup where the bed strength is limited, but it has got a limited application in a very large setup of patients for something like a 1200 or 1500 bed hospital. Every patient screening is a bit difficult. Hence, it can be restricted to referred patients. Screening tools can be hospital specific or it can be a validated tool, but it's better if it takes into account the severity of the disease score. So that is very important. Moving on to nutrition assessment, the dietitians are aware of the A, B, C, D of nutrition assessment, but I would like to just draw your attention to some of the COVID specific criteria which we need to ask or check with the patient if they are COVID positive. So yes, presence of cough, cold, sore throat, fever, fatigue. Fatigue is very, very common in patients, even if they do well eventually, but the initial phase they are really tired. Presence of breathlessness, whether that breathlessness is at rest or that breathlessness is after eating food or it is only on exertion, we need to have a good idea about that to modify the food consistency. Sense of smell and taste, as you all know, the sense of smell and taste also is one of the loss of sense of taste and smell is one of the feature of COVID. Some patients may have nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain, anorexia, food preferences, whether the patient's food intake has declined or pain in swallowing, what is the fluid intake of the patient, any comorbidities present, and what is the underlying disease. For example, if the patient has come with esophageal cancer, then what all things you need to check, what all symptoms you need to ask, all those things need to be done rather than only focusing on COVID. Do that also, but don't forget the underlying disease that also needs to be addressed chiefly. So some of the biochemical parameters that we may come across, CBC. So here we can see that CBC actually checks for the WBC count. As I said, low WBC count is one of the key factor that we see in COVID. So therefore, just have a look at the WBC count. Sometimes if the patient is in sepsis, the count can go high also. If the patient is in multi-organ dysfunction syndrome, the liver function test can be deranged. The renal function test also can be deranged if there is renal involvement or acute kidney injury. Okay, if the patient is diabetic, check for the HbA1c, thyroid, TFT. One of the most important factor which we need to also look at as dietitians is arterial blood gases. And arterial blood gases actually give us a good idea about the pH of the blood, PCO2, that is the carbon dioxide level in the blood, PO2, bicarbonate, and the saturation, that is amount of oxygen present in the blood or attached to HB. So these parameters give us a broad idea about the lung situations or the hypoxia level or how well is the patient maintaining the oxygen level. Apart from ABG, there are some markers which kind of indicate infection, that is the ESR, okay, erythrocyte sedimentation rate. If it's more than 20, C-reactive protein, all of us are aware, is a classic marker of inflammation. It's an acute phase protein synthesized by the liver. And then to mark CPK is a marker of cardiac muscle injury. So those also may be high and may be done in patients with COVID. So need to check and interpret them well. In critically ill patients, as I said, the blood coagulability is also high. That is, the tendency of blood clotting is high. So therefore, a classic test called the D-dimer test is done for all the patients who are critically ill or presented with ARDS. Also, one of the marker of inflammation is ferritin. So whether ferritin generates an immune response or otherwise it's still in question, but ferritin is one of the marker of inflammation. TROP-I is one of the key marker of cardiac muscle injury. So as I said that there could be septic shock and there could be cardiac muscle injury that also may be high in patients who are critically ill and having multi-organ dysfunction. Similarly, interleukin-6, which is one of the chief cytokines, which is also part of the inflammatory response that some of the patient show, that also can be checked, or rather is checked in critically ill patient, and it may be high. And if these parameters are high, that actually also predict the patient prognosis. Moving on to different types of COVID. So if patients, it could be possible that in mild COVID, patients have cough, cold, maybe nasal congestion. There could be mild fever, headaches, muscle pain, fatigue is very common, but there is absence of dyspnea. Breathlessness is not present, and appetite is perfectly normal. Now, in these patients, what do? We need to give them, most importantly, adequate hydration. So give lot of warm fluids, but avoid spicy foods, because what happens is if they are coughing, spicy foods can aggravate the cough. So do that. Also, all the key nutrients that I mentioned, that is complex carbohydrate, good protein, fats, on the micronutrients, give a balanced diet in this case. Okay, but certainly increase the protein intake, which can be either through foods by increasing the protein content from the food that you can give to the patients, or it could be by prescribing oral nutrition supplementation in those who are not able to meet their requirement through food. So best is to increase their protein requirement, and micronutrient supplementations could be B complex, vitamin C around 1 gram per day, zinc around 100 milligram, and vitamin D can be 60,000 once a week for 8 weeks. So this is how you treat patients with mild COVID. Now, if these patients have mild symptoms, but if they are posted for anything, for example, if patient is admitted with an MI and they test him and he's tested positive for COVID, the patient does not have any symptoms of COVID, but then there is MI, he undergoes an angiography or then a plasty. You need to then follow the principles of a patient whom you would treat for MI. So all the cardiac diets, that is the soft foods, all those things will come in. Similarly, if the patient has got, say, undergone an emergency amputation and is diabetic, and then no symptoms at all and come positive for COVID, you need to focus as a dietitian on the underlying, of course, the wound management, wound healing nutrients, most importantly, glycemic control. So, yes, it is very important that we have to pay attention to the COVID aspect, but do not forget that the underlying disease, the underlying problem with which sometimes the patients might get admitted, that needs to be addressed very well. Okay, so this is about mild COVID-19 features. Moving on to moderate COVID-19 positive features. Now, not to forget here, as we had seen in our pathophysiology, that here the patients may have breathlessness on exertion because of the buildup of fluid. Patients, because of the inflammatory response of the cytokine, the patient here may have high grade fever. There may be fatigue. Okay, there could be presence of cough, respiratory infection, lower respiratory infection has set in. X-ray changes may be present, but patient in this stage also maintain normal oxygen saturation. Okay, they can manage without oxygen, and the appetite may be normal to subnormal, may be low, may be perfectly all right. Okay, now why I have put presence of comorbidities here is, even if you have, say, mild symptoms of COVID, but if you have diabetes, if the patient has hypertension or cardiovascular disease, then that person risk, considering the risk that the patient carries, they are categorized into moderate form of COVID-19 positive features. So therefore, it becomes very important to these categories, though the presentation appears they maintain saturation, but these need certainly good amount of attention, and we should prevent the progress further. So underlying disease, procedure, treatment, whatever reason for which the patient is admitted, that also needs to be considered. So what are you going to do here? Same thing. First, adequate hydration, no spicy food, that part remains the same. You give all that. But don't forget, deal with the comorbidities well. So if the patient is diabetic, okay, we have to actually, as per the endocrinologist, the glycemic target for somewhere is between 140 to 180 postprandial should be there. If the patients are admitted in mild form, they give their normal OHS, but if the patient worsens, they are immediately switch on the insulin. So here also you need to, every hospital has got therapeutic diets. There could be diabetic diet, salt restricted diet, renal diet, high protein diet, etc. So if the patient is diabetic, put them on hospital diabetic diet, follow all the principles of controlling the blood sugar levels. Okay, if the patient is hypertensive, control the blood pressure. If there are renal disease, control the renal parameters, very important. And if there is any other line condition, treated. But to that, we need to add additional proteins and additional micronutrients. Now, here at any point of time, if patient has dyspnea on exertion, but if he complains of poor appetite or not able to eat normal chapati, vegetable, rice, etc., change you need to do is change the consistency of the food to soft meal. Okay, and if you still feel patient's appetite is little lesser, consider adding oral nutrition supplement which should provide at least 400 to 600 calories of per day. So if you provide at least 400 to 600 calories per day, and if the patient eats other foods and generates around 800 calories, you still end up giving 1400 calories to that patient. Okay, so that is very important that even in moderate form, we can make these small changes. Now, I would suggest not to use a disease-specific formula. Now, when I say a disease-specific formula, don't give a diabetic formula, or a renal patient, a renal formula, or a liver patient to a hepatic formula to a liver patient. Why? Because here we may land up compromising on the protein. The ideal thing here we can do is we can give a 2 kilocal per ml formula, okay, which is more calorie dense. And why it would be even beneficial? Because they are dissolved in a very less quantity of fluid. So they can be ideal even for your kidney patients or cardiac patients or with liver patients or any category which has got fluid restriction at any given point of time. So this is how manage your patients with moderate illness. Okay, so control the basic parameters won't change, but if needed, change the consistency, add supplements, and treat the underlying disease. Now, moving on to the next part, which is also very crucial, which rather becomes more serious, that is ARDS develops, that is acute respiratory distress syndrome, develops in 42% of patients presenting with COVID-19, okay, pneumonia, and 61 to 80% of them require ICU care. So what are the two classic parameters? A, increase respiratory rate. You have to breathe harder, okay, and saturation levels, SpO2, that is blood saturation level, if it's below 92. So if your respiratory rate is more than 30 breaths per minute, if your saturation is below 92%, and if your PaO2, that is partial pressure of oxygen to fraction of inspired oxygen, is less than 300 milligram per Hg, which indicates hypoxemia, that is when you can say the patient is having ARDS. And as we are seeing in the pathophysiology, when in ARDS, it can also coexist with systemic inflammatory response syndrome. So here the patient may have simultaneously septic shock, thrombosis, or multi-organ dysfunction syndrome. So what do we do over here? These patients may be treated with modes of treatment can be A, they're treated with invasive mechanical ventilation. They may require mechanical ventilator, or they are treated with non-invasive ventilation. So non-invasive ventilation can be nasal oxygen or BiPAP ventilation. So as you can see, a BiPAP is fixed over here and it can be attached to the ventilator machine. And what they do is the amount of pressure entering in and out of the lung is controlled to make sure that alveoli do not collapse. So that is when it is, that is how it is managed. Now, what are the key components that we are going to remember when the patients are critically ill and when the patient needs to be, you have to deal with critically ill patients is A, initiate feeding when the patient is hemodynamically stable. As soon as the patient maintains blood pressure, pulse rate is okay, temperature is fine, you can start feeding the patient. Avoid prolonged starvation. Okay, ideally within 48 hours, patient's feeding should be initiated. In any case, whether the patient is eating orally or through enteral nutrition, through tube feeding, see to it that we should avoid overfeeding here. Because A, if the patient is in sepsis, is in systemic inflammatory response syndrome or septic shock, in that case, patients should not be overfed. It can be detrimental. So we can begin with as less as 15 to 20 calorie per kg body weight and move to 25 to 30 calorie per kg body weight as per patient's tolerance. That's very, very important. Okay. Similarly, as patients improve, you can meet calorie and protein requirements gradually because there is severe septic and shock. So meet your requirements gradually. Don't be in a hurry to meet patients' nutrition requirements. Of course, protein 1.2 to 1.5 gram per kg present body weight. And here we are actually going to follow the principles of ARDS. So we are going to restrict carbohydrate to around 45 to 50% and fat up to around 30 to 35% or up to 30% and good amount of protein. Now, often it happens that patient in this condition in ARDS may also be presented with acute kidney injury. So even if there is acute kidney injury or liver injury, we need not restrict protein here. Okay? Because AKI is temporary and we know the reason because it is the hyperperfusion of the nephrons. That is the reason the nephrons may have shut and it may have led to AKI. And if AKI further increases, the patient is going to require renal replacement therapy, dialysis. So there, in fact, further you need not restrict protein. But even if it's AKI, do not restrict protein, or in liver injury, don't restrict protein. Okay? Address underlying comorbidity that goes without saying. If it's diabetes, the glycemic target can be 140 to 180. If it's conditions like, say, CABG or stroke, the glycemic control can be little tighter and it gives you a better outcome. If it's a cardiac condition, liver condition, we need to pay attention to the sodium and fluid restriction. If it's renal condition, along with the fluid, we have to look at a range of electrolytes, that is sodium, potassium, calcium, phosphorus, etc. And if the patient develops diarrhea, then we need to look at the lactose-free BRAD protocol. So this is how you are going to manage your patients with critical care, but we'll see in detail how. So as I said, if the patient is on nasal oxygen, okay, he still can be eating orally, or if the oral intake is poor or patient is a bit altered, he may be on nasogastric feeding. Okay, and if the patient is oral, the method of administration can be giving semi-solid to liquid feeds. If the patient is on nasogastric feeds, then we need to give feeding through continuous drip. We'll see the benefits of it later on. If the patient is on BiPAP, what happens in BiPAP is BiPAP can be attached either 24 hours, like continuously, or the patient can be given intermittent BiPAP, that is certain hours of BiPAP and then they're not on BiPAP. So again here, the patient can be on oral feeds or the patient can be on nasogastric feeding. Now, always remember, patients are breathless, they are on BiPAP, and therefore when the BiPAP is taken out, we may have a breathing space of say 15 to 20 minutes. In patients who are on 24-hour BiPAP, we may have to feed them in say a shorter span, because the moment you remove it, there is a possibility that the saturation might fall. So what do? Can we make them really eat chapati, dal, rice, vegetable, a full meal? No, we cannot do that because we don't have that much time, and the patient, the more they chew, the more it can actually increase the work of breathing, they more can feel breathless. So what is to be done? If the patients are on oral feeding BiPAP, give them meals which are calorie dense, which can be actually finished in a span of 15 to 20 minutes, which we'll see later how we can do it. Similarly, nasogastric, you can still feed this patient continuous drip or bolus, but continuous drip is a better option. And if the patient is on mechanical ventilator, then the patient is obviously going to be on nasogastric tube feeding. That's when the preferred method of administration is feeding through continuous drip. So This is one case where the patient is, say, on non-invasive ventilation. That is, either the patient is on BiPAP or if the patient is on nasal oxygen. And for some reason, the patient's intake has decreased a bit. Patient is not able to eat. Patient is fatigued, but was eating till yesterday. Suddenly, the intake has dropped. What can you do? What you can do is you can progress in steps. The first step is begin exclusively with 4 to 5 liquid feeds per day with calorie dense or 2 cal per ml sucrose free formulas and mix it with solvents which could be either milk or boiled water. Just give them that throughout the day. Okay, the insulin and other things can be very much adjusted if you communicate with your medical team and system well. So 4 to 5 liquid feeds per day, calorie dense, and meet their requirement. Don't go to overfeed. Even if you meet around 1,500 calories, it's fine. As patient improves, how would you know if the oxygen requirements reduces of the patient, or if the patient feels comfortable, or if he maintains saturation? Okay, then what you can do is for 1-2 days, if you do that, next what you can do, introduce 2 soft meals as lunch and dinner, and still keep 2 to 3 commercial feeds with milk or water for breakfast, for evening and bedtime. So what you do is you gradually are bringing back the patient into normal routine, and then shift back to soft diet, complete soft diet, but add a high protein formula to meet the protein requirement, and eventually to a regular texture once patient is off O2 and the chest X-ray has improved and the patient feels better. So even when the patient is on, so ARDS patient on BiPAP, poor oral intake, you can use this protocol. And again, I'm saying these formulas, that is 2 cal per ml, can be safely used for all comorbidities, diabetes, CKD. No need to use disease-specific formula and continue the micronutrient supplementations. So, as you can see here, day 1, day 2, begin with 8:30, 12:30. So give 5 feeds with milk or water with supplement. Then as patient improves, replace 2 meals with a very softly cooked khichdi. They can gulp easily, finish in around 10-15 minutes, but give rest of the feeds as liquid so they get nutrition, they are less fatigued and they improve. However, if there is no improvement after step 1, that is, even if you have started this liquid diet, but the patient is not able to consume it, or if the oral intake remains poor, or if the patient has developed altered sensorium, okay, or if the patient has been admitted in a critical stage with low saturation, you can actually consider RT incision and initiate the enteral nutrition protocol. So now moving on to the enteral nutrition protocol, nasogastric feeding. So it can be applicable to both non-invasive ventilation or mechanical ventilation, which is invasive. When is it indicated? Same thing. Indicated when oral intake is very poor. If you're on mechanical ventilator, you have to be fed through nasogastric feed, or if the patient develops altered sensorium. What is the preferred route of feeding? That is continuous drip feeding, we heard. Because better EN tolerance. Patient in such conditions who are in sepsis or septic shock or SRS, for them, continuous drip is the best method of feeding because actually there is reduced risk of aspiration, patient tolerate it well, and with the present kind of formulas, we can meet the protein requirement also, calorie and protein requirement, and other uh, comorbidities also can be addressed. Also, one thing which is important, which we need to consider is if you give bolus feeds, if you feed every 2 hourly to the patient, it also increases the exposure of the nursing staff to go every time and feed the patient, hold the tube, pour the formula, so the exposure time also increases. So in a way, more from the patient's benefit side, but also from the other side, continuous drip remains the choice of feeding and it is accepted or tolerated very well. Now again, type of formula, I've said it enough. Prefer a calorie dense formula, sucrose free formula, safe for the comorbidities, can manage fluid restriction, electrolyte balance, glycemic control. What can some of the adjuncts that you can add over here? One can be a MCT oil, okay. Second can be as a source of calories also, and it is tolerated very well by the patients. Omega-3 fatty acid as anti-inflammatory can be added in the feeds. Fiber supplements in some of the patients, also for glycemic control and otherwise also, because now what is going to happen here is we will be exclusively using the commercial formula. Now, many of the hospital settings, okay, use kitchen feeds, and kitchen feeds also, if prepared aseptically, are very well tolerated by the patient. And in every setting, based on the patient's financial condition, giving commercial formula to every feed, every patient who is on RT is not possible. So ideally what happens is kitchen feeds prepared aseptically can be given to patients, but along with a supplementary. So the oral nutrition supplement is a supplement, not the main thing. In some hospitals, especially in ICUs and other setup, exclusive commercial formulas are used. But why no, again, kitchen formulas is because right from the preparation to handling to delivering it to storing it for a long time, and in what vessels are we going to store, everything is basing a lot of, I mean, everything can be not really the right with the present protocol of hygiene. So the best thing is to use commercial formula in the present setup. So fiber supplements or micronutrient supplements has to be continued over here. So what you can do is enteral nutrition protocol. Day one, you can begin with a test feed where you can start the patient feeding 0.30 ml 30 cc per hour, that is 0.5 cc per minute, okay, and gradually increase it to 60 cc per hour, that is 1 cc per minute. Now, this is very well tolerated by most of the patients, but what you can do next is you can plan with an isocaloric diet, okay, and what you can do is you can gradually increase or build your patient's energy and protein requirement. So this is how you can feed the patient through continuous drip. Now, when you do it, what all you need to monitor is the feed tolerance, okay, how is the patient doing well, whether it is the requirement of oxygen or whether the patient ventilator, so whether he was completely dependent on ventilator, now he has been weaned off and he's on CPAP, how it is, that we need to check. So that is a sign of improvement. What are the changes in CT scan or X-ray? Is it getting better? Okay. If the patient is on steroid to reduce the inflammation, there is a possibility of hyperglycemia even in a non-diabetic patient. So diabetics will certainly have a higher response to the infection because of the inflammation in the body. Certainly they are at risk of hyperglycemia and even decay. But here we need to monitor their sugars well. We need to space their meals well properly and keep a check on the HGT. CBC, blood gases will tell you the saturation of the oxygen, pH, etc. GI symptoms, urine output, check for all that. And of course, the disease-specific markers needs to be checked when the patient is in the critical care setup. So this is how you're going to monitor. Now, moving on to one of the other aspects, before I move to this, I would like to also share that there is one more group which is very vulnerable, is pregnant women. So pregnant women who are COVID positive, it has been seen, it's a miracle really, that the babies born are all COVID negative. Okay. Now, what should be done for the baby? Okay. As per the WHO protocol, if the mother is having mild or, and basically if she's stable, the mother can wear a mask and still breastfeed the baby. And breastfeeding is considered to be extremely safe. Okay. And why? Because the mother also passes the antibodies against the disease to the baby. So if done in the most hygienic, aseptic manner with proper hand washing, cleaning of the area, wearing proper mask, okay, if it's done that way, it has been done successfully, and even the babies have been checked after that and they have not turned positive in spite of positive COVID mother breastfeeding the baby. But if a mother is having a bit of moderate form where she is experiencing breathlessness, a bit of symptoms, still the milk can be expressed and the baby can be fed the milk. That also can be done. And if it's a very critical situation, in that case, maybe milk bank can be used to help the baby to feed the baby. So even for pregnant women, breastfeeding for the infants is the best way of best food rather you can say than infant formulas. That needs to be kept in mind. Also, as you know, that yes, that COVID requirements are high, but when the mother is breastfeeding, those additional calorie, additional proteins needs to be given to the mother to make sure that there is, and of course, lots of fluids to make sure that the milk supply is adequate. If at all it's a bit less, then galactogogues also can be added. Okay, so this factor which certainly needs to be kept in mind. Well, moving on to now, moving from the clinical part, we are moving to the food service part. So when a hospital, a ward or a floor or a hospital becomes COVID, managing COVID patients, you need to focus on A, setting the routine of the food handler. So when are they, what are the timing, how are they going to work, the breaks, all those things needs to be decided, pre-decided rather. Make sure that the food handlers cook, serve food with utmost safety, taking all the precautions so that they themselves don't contract and then don't give it to else. So that safety of the food handler is extremely important. Also, one of the most important factor is setting a protocol of delivery of food to and from the ward to prevent infection. So we need to make sure that the trolley should not enter the isolation ward at any given point of time. Okay, and food also should be given in a most septic way without any problems. Secondly, as the virus remains on steel or plastic for 70 to 48 to 72 hours, though the amount, the load may decrease, but patients should not be fed, rather patients should be fed or given food in disposable material. So you cannot serve the food in steel or in you can say cutlery which is to be taken back. No, it can either be a pre-packed meal in a disposable container. So either there is a possibility that at kitchen level each person's food is prepared in a disposable container, served to the patient, incinerated, or bring the food in trolley, circulate, distribute the food in the safe zone, then give it to the patient. And again, whatever is the disposable cutlery, incinerate it and give it back. So that can be done. Also, setting a protocol for coordination with the nursing staff, because nursing staff are managing, of course, along with the doctors, neck to neck, they are managing the wards. There are also some of the other staff which coordinate with other nurses. So communication about food service management, about every aspect is extremely important and should be done with utmost care so that your kitchen should remain always, every area, but kitchen also should remain a very safe zone because that's the most important part also. Moving on, learning and adapting to present needs. Well, here remember that you are an integral part of an interdisciplinary team. Also with not only interdisciplinary team of doctors, nurses, social workers, but also the administration. So whatever key decisions are taken about food service management, about patient management, you have to be that important part. Also, see, if it's a small setup of a certain number of COVID patient being managed in the hospital, individual diet planning sent across the ward becomes still manageable. But when your bed strength increases to 1,000 or 1,200, you cannot reach each and every patient. So what is the right thing to do? You need to reach out to the patient as much as possible. So what can you do? You should actually prepare some standard enteral and oral protocols and circulate it across the wards. So nursing actually should be educated about, okay, if the patient comes at night, next day, what is the basic things that they can start? And then as you come to know that there are RT patients with RT, you can do individual planning, but some basic skeleton should be prepared and circulated in the wards so that some basics are started. Okay, and also at any point of time, patient should not be starved. Next, and the most important thing is make the best utilization of digital media for patient management. So how can you reach patient? Okay, so digital media has made things very easy. So if the patient has a, a reference or a call, you can actually communicate. Or actually, one of the most important thing which we need to understand over here is we are saying give this, give that, but the sheer thought of contracting COVID can actually, the patient's mental status can be compromised. And many hospitals also have initiated counseling strategy to make the patient deal with the disease better. So when that goes side by side, even dietitians can do telecalling or video calling or using calls to coordinate at different point of time and make the best use of digital media for patient management is the key right now. It is very, very important, and you can manage patients really well. Prepare take home message. Now, in a 1,000 or 1,200 bedded hospital, if you're in a small setup, the discharge diets can be planned, can be circulated. But in a large setup, if you can actually prepare some basic structural oral sheets wherein you're giving them basic idea about COVID, you can still reach out to a large population and you still give them some take home message, because there are many myths that they have, which could be as much as non-vegetarian foods, they can't take that, or not eating certain foods, a lot of fears in their mind. So, some take home message, which could be, of course, if there's comorbidity, along with the comorbidity, or basic COVID instructions, that nutrition guidelines to follow, some instruction needs to be given to them. Very important. Also, coordinate and arrange. Now, as it's said that okay, certain institutes not using were using commercial kitchen feeds, but now is the time suddenly it has occurred that they can't be used, and you need to use more of only exclusive commercial formulas. So you can't just give up and say that what am I supposed to do? You need to take that extra step. So it could be either the help of a social worker or a donation that you can procure these commercial formulas and use for the patients, but see to it that the patient's quality or the basic protocols are followed with. Okay, and yes, as dietitians, we think, we are taught, we follow, we encourage individually tailor-made diets. So yes, it is very important to have individually tailor-made diets, but that goes extremely well when you have a smaller setup of patients. When you are in a large setup, the individual tailor-made shifts a bit to a broader perspective, to a more number of audience. So the planning also needs to be for a broader audience, and that's when you can meet your objectives. So what else can you do? This particularly applies to hospitals with larger beds. Generate patient education material. As I said, it could be posters, it could be videos, it could be nutrition-based themes. Okay, so those can be shown to the patient, and certainly it has an impact. So whatever you see, it reaches you. So patient education also should be given priority and should be at most treated. Last, I cannot forget this group, because this group could be either asymptomatic COVID positive patients, or there could be carriers, or there could be non-COVID patients. Now, what happens is we see a lot of people at home. Lockdown is also synonymous to cooking a lot of calorie dense meals every day and night. And a lot of saturated fat goes in, lot of sugar goes in, lot of refined flour goes in. So what happens is here we have to remember also forget about the diabetes and hypertension or renal, but there are also people who have the risk of gaining weight. So best is to have a simple home food, simple balanced diet, good amount of fluid, okay, and include that with good sleep, meditation, and some exercise which you can do at home. Okay, that's very, very important, and that should be strictly followed to prevent any further developments of comorbidity in the future when the lockdown gets over. So pay attention to this part also very well. Okay, so yes, so as I had said earlier, there was nothing over here. So there were like three different setups. But what do you need? We need teamwork, we need technology, we need to know how to manage things, out of the box thinking, coming with quick solutions, clinical nutrition base, and good communication. If you have all these things, okay, remember one thing. This is that kind of a pandemic when nobody knows anything about it. We are knowing things on daily basis. We are learning new facts daily. So everything has to be done, you can say, uh, very, like spontaneously. So we need to also move towards the direction of progress step by step, but come up with more and more solutions and make your knowledge of the nutrition this, it reaches more and more people as much as possible. Thank you for your attention. And this is the one I was talking about. This article is written so well, and it says fast food fever, reviewing the impact of Western diets on immunity. So please read or refer to this. It's an excellent article. Thank you so much.
Another, I think you can stop your screen share. Okay, thank you so much. Okay, on behalf of, thank you for the wonderful information that you have given us on COVID and its medical nutrition therapy. It was fantastic to hear so much of new things. On behalf of the Department of Foods, Nutrition and Dietetics, we would like to thank you profusely for taking the time and giving us so much of knowledge. Now, there are plenty
Sure,
of
ma'am.
questions which have come. So, we have just summed up a few which are very important and pertinent, which I hope you can answer. Now, the first question which even came to my mind was that if COVID damages the respiratory tract to a great extent, then how is it that people are being asymptomatic or remain asymptomatic for a very long time?
See, there are two things over here. Uh, one, your immune system. Okay, so if your immune system is strong enough, certainly you're going to fight the disease. But also, what matters here is the viral load. So, if the viral load is relatively lesser, okay, and your immune system is strong, or if you're not in direct contact with the population or people who have contracted COVID, so if you're taking with a good amount of precautions, then still you can manage with the disease and you may not manifest the symptoms or contract the disease.
Okay. Then there was one more question which I thought which was very important. In the ICU, when the patients are on ventilators, okay, we generally take, we don't take the present body weight, but we take the ideal body weight. So in case of obese patients, how do you assess the individual while planning, or how will you plan? Which kind of weight will you take?
Well, that's actually a valid question. I would like to say here, you can take their, like, ask the usual weight. So either you discuss with the relatives or whosoever is the caretaker and figure out with them what is this patient's usual weight. So often it happens when they walk in, they are weighed also. So many times the weight may be available. So either you take that weight and feed with lesser calories, that is 15 to, like 20 kilocalories or even lesser than that, or based on their height, you can take their ideal body weight and then calculate the requirement. That can be done.
Okay, now we are talking so much about immune boosters. Now, is there a established role of vitamin C in preventing or treating say to keep the symptoms of COVID-19 at bay?
See, right now saying preventing, certainly not. Preventing, certainly not. But yes, I can definitely say what is happening right now is also that role of immune system in either cold, cough, immunity, and its role in T and B cell proliferation, differentiation is established. So yes, vitamin C does play a good role in boosting the immune system or keeping the immune system in check. However, supplementation also sometimes is important. Why? For the healthcare workers or otherwise, because presently, if you actually look at the lockdown, not all of us may have access to all the food groups. Like, it is possibility that I may not have had, say, fresh fruits and vegetable for a long, for say 2 3 days. There is a possibility. Okay, so in such case, it is possible that we may not get adequate vitamin C. So they're taking a mild dose of vitamin C, of course, with consultation, but saying that it will prevent COVID, I don't think that's possible.
Okay, thank you so much. And one more question which I would like to ask you is that, you had emphasized on the importance of hydration in COVID. Now, in case people are having a lot of edema, do we have to, I mean, what should be the steps which we should take?
Yes, so for every patient, okay, whenever you, first of all, patients who, I mean, establish diagnosis, if you see there is CKD, or if you see the patient has got DCMP or a cardiac involvement where the ejection fraction is around 15%, 20% or lesser, or patients with liver disease who have got ascites, such patients. And then there are a set of patients who are in systemic inflammatory response syndrome or in sepsis. In such patients, you need to always communicate with your medical team, and you need to check that is there a fluid restriction for this patient. So these some factors, so checking fluid restriction for these critical cases, so patient with ARDS or with these underlying comorbidities, we certainly need to check fluid restriction and accordingly plan our diet in a way that we don't exceed that fluids.
Okay, and last question before we sign off for today. Have you observed any changes between the international guidelines and the situation what we are seeing here in India, or probably even in your hospital?
So you're talking about international guidelines pertaining to nutrition?
Yes.
Okay. So see, everywhere, actually, I'll be very honest. So now there are these guidelines which are released internationally for critical care management, and the Indian associations also have come up with management of critical care management for the patients. More or less, they go on the same skeleton. So when to begin, how much to initiate, when to start enteral nutrition, what to begin. All those guidelines are more or less similar, but and more or less similar guidelines also. And even in our institute, I can say that more or less early feeding within as soon as the patient is hemodynamically stable, use the gut as early as possible, okay, not using the disease specific formulas. All these guidelines are more or less similar that we follow.
Okay, thank you so much, Anara, for the elaborate explanation in the patient question answer session.
My
I think you can exit from the video now.
Okay.
Yeah. And before we sign off for the evening, just a reminder to all the participants that tomorrow we have the third webinar. The topic for tomorrow is embracing immense digital opportunities in the field of nutrition and dietetics. It is to be conducted by Mrs. Prajna Padde, and the timing is 3 to 4. So hope to see you all tomorrow, and have a very good evening and a good day.